Hey there blues fans, this is John and here's your Tuesday Blues. In this lesson we're going to talk about the second component of an effective practice strategy. In the last lesson in this series we talked about how crucial warming up is. And if you haven't covered that video, definitely go back and pick up a couple of exercises to help you warm up. It is critically important that you warm up before moving into the second component of your practice routine, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Is the second component called your area of focus. This is where you really need to just kind of get laser focused on one area of guitar playing and music theory, and really just hammer the point home for several minutes of your guitar practice time. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to take you through an example of what that might look like. And keep in mind that this should change throughout your week as you're practicing, and you should focus on different things on different days. So right now I'm going to focus on chords, but we could just as easily focus our practice routine on scales, on arpeggios, on rhythm, on guitar techniques, and we should alternate this part of a practice routine. But for an example, I want to take you through what a practice routine with a focus on chords might look like. So here we go. In this particular practice session, I want to focus on the C major chord. So we're going to start out with this basic C major chord here with the root on the 5th string, 3rd fret. And what I want to do is, if I'm going to practice and I want to focus on the C major chord, I need to know obviously how to play this, but I want to take this to just about as far as I possibly can. And a great way to do that is to run this C major chord through the caged system. So I can play this C major chord in a variety of different spots on the neck. So briefly, what the caged system does is it lets us play a chord, pick a chord like C, and we can play it by using familiar chord shapes that we already know. So this is the C shape. The A shape gets its name from the A major shape right here. So if you want to play that, you need to take this shape, sort of vision it like this as a bar chord, where your bar would be on the nut here, so the open string, and you can move that up, and you've got an A shape that you can play anywhere. If we want to do that with a C chord, we'll put our root note here on the C of the 5th string, and we've got a nice C major chord. So that's the A shape. And if we continue with that logic, we can find our G shape, and this is a tough one here, but the G shape leads off with the root on the 8th fret of the 6th string, but it's a big open G that really just looks like this. If you refinger it, we mostly play the G chord like this a lot, but if you finger it this way, you get the same notes of a G chord, and then if you envision that bar, you can move this up and play it anywhere. And here, if we do that leading off from the 8th fret, we get a G chord. So that's the G in the caged shape. And then we want to move on to an E. So think about an E shape. Now if we envision that this was our finger, we would have to refinger like this. Then we can move this up to the 8th fret for our E shape. Okay, that's just a basic full bar chord. And at the 8th fret, because that's a C, we've got our C major chord. And then if we do a D, we'll want to refinger. And this is tricky because you're going to have to hit this pinky on the 2nd string, and in the real D, it's going to be on the 3rd fret. But envision that bar on the 4th string, and you can move this up. So if we want to move it all the way up to the 10th fret here, on the 4th string, we've got a C chord. So let's just listen to these chords in different positions on the neck. You'll hear that it still sounds similar. So it's still a C chord. All the notes are really shared between each of these shapes and positions on the fretboard, but there's definitely a little bit of a different feel from each one of them. right, so definitely notice that they all are C. They all sound like a C chord. And being able to move these through the C, A, G, E, and D shapes will really open up your idea of a C chord on the fretboard. This is something great to work on if you're not familiar with this already in a practice routine. So you would spend your time making sure that you could get the correct fingerings of these C chord shapes, and realizing that our C knowledge doesn't begin and end here. We move up the fretboard, run it through the caged shape system, and we can get some pretty cool things. And there are going to be a couple of trouble spots for you. This big G is really hard to play. It's difficult. There's a wide stretch there. But work at it and really focus on getting good clean notes through all of the 6 strings. And the same thing with this bar chord. They can be tricky, but you really want to get a nice good sound out of each of them. So these are a couple of areas where you would really focus your practice efforts. And then finally, this D shape here is tough. There's no way to sugarcoat that. These 3 fingers don't normally want to work together, particularly this finger, the little finger. So you're going to have to spend some time working on that. And that's what your goal should be for this particular part of your practice session. Make sure that you can run through the chord shapes, that you understand the shape, that this is an A shape, this is a G, E, and D, and of course the C, and make sure that you can actually get good clean notes out of each one of those chords and focus on C. By the end of this, if you practice this for several minutes or as much of your practice routine as you can, you should have a really good idea of some options for playing a C chord on the fretboard. This is going to come in really handy no matter if you're a rhythm player, a lead player, a finger picker, or a flat picker. This is super important to understand. Nothing opened up the fretboard for me quite like learning where I can play different versions of the same chord. All right, so I hope you will pick up the tab for this lesson, because I'll give you a few exercises and a few tips and pointers to put this into your own practice. This is kind of a how to practice lesson, and this is just an example of what you should practice. But pick up the tab and we'll take this a few steps further. All right, and definitely make sure to come back and check the next lesson out, because that's where we're going to put together a little quick ditty just to put this thing into practice and really test your ability to move through the caged chords and to make sure that you've really got a sense of playing a C major chord in a ton of different spots. That's the part of the practice routine where we put together and we put into practice, put into play really, what we learned in our focus area. This is where it all kind of comes together. So definitely stick with me to the next lesson and practice this in between time, and I'll see you next week.